Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever stopped to wonder just how much influence the biggest tech leaders actually wield? I mean, not just over, your daily clicks and scrolls, but over the very structures of our democracy. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating, comprehensive postdoctoral analysis. It looks into the political clout of tech CEOs and this concept they call techno-libertarian governance models.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is how the analysis frames this. It's not just about, say, policy preferences getting pushed. It's presented as a fundamental challenge to the very legitimacy of democracy as we know it. Our mission today really is to help you understand how these tech elites gain such, well, unprecedented political influence. And it's not only through money, though that's a big part, but also systematic regulatory capture, platform monopolies, and even embedding their specific values right into the tech systems we all use every day.
Right. So the core question becomes, how are these tech leaders actively reshaping democracy? And maybe more importantly, what does it mean for you? That's what we're aiming to figure out. Okay, so let's start with the money, because here's where it gets really interesting. The 2024 election cycle, the analysis calls it a watershed moment. The tech industry apparently deployed something like $1.2 billion in political spending. And get this figure. Elon Musk alone is cited as contributing over $277 million to pro-Trump organizations. That basically made tech CEOs the largest individual political donors ever. That's a lot of influence, isn't it?
It's absolutely staggering. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis argues it's way beyond just, conventional lobbying. What we're apparently seeing is a shift towards systematic regulatory capture. It's about direct political integration, not just influence from the outside. You mentioned placing people inside agencies. Well, the source details this. It highlights over 36 employees and associates of four key tech figures, Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, and Palmer Luckey, being placed in federal agencies that actually oversee their own industries.
Wow. And the payoff? Was there a clear payoff?
Oh, yeah. The analysis points out that within months of the 2025 administration starting, this network reportedly secured over $6 billion in federal contracts.
$6 billion.
That's the figure cited. SpaceX apparently got $5.9 billion for Space Force missions. And Anduril, another company in their orbit, was supposedly positioned for a huge $22 billion Army contract.
Okay, so the financial ties are clear. But you said it's not just money changing hands. These giants also control
The pipes.
right? The information infrastructure.
Yeah. Exactly. And this raises a really important question, doesn't it? What happens when just a handful of companies control so much of our information? Think about it. Meta, according to the source, employs 65 lobbyists. That's like one for every 8 members of Congress. They spent $24.4 million on lobbying in 2024 alone. But their real power arguably goes beyond that. Google commands over 90% of global search. Meta controls 70% of social media time. And for huge chunks of the population, these platforms are the primary news sources.
Yeah, so the source coins a term for this, digital feudalism. It's quite a loaded term. It implies this system where the platform owners aren't just hosts. They're shaping the whole environment, influencing everything from the algorithms deciding what you see to content moderation, which directly affects democratic debate. It really makes you think, who's the lord of this digital manor?
Right. And to truly get our heads around this shift, the analysis uses some critical theory frameworks, sort of conceptual lenses, if you will. They help us see the deeper structures at play beyond just the surface events.
Okay, like what? The first one mentioned is Foucault and biopower. That sounds academic. How does that apply here? Think of it, the source suggests, as the management of populations. Tech platforms embodying what's called surveillance capitalism are constantly extracting our behavioral data, not just to sell ads, but to predict and maybe even modify behavior at a population level. It's described as a shift from old-school discipline to managing these collective processes almost invisibly.
And that connects directly to this techno-libertarian vision. You have figures like Curtis Yarvin proposing CEO monarchs, essentially, or Balaji Srinivasan talking about network states run on blockchains. They seem to fuse this idea of sovereign power with biopower data-driven governance. It's about creating new forms of techno-biopolitical control that could potentially bypass traditional democratic legitimacy altogether.
Fascinating and a little chilling.
Okay.
What's next? There's Deleuze and societies of control. So the idea is instead of confined institutions like prisons or schools, we have these fluid network systems.
Exactly. He talked about modulation, continuous adjustment, continuous control, rather than discrete commands or rules.
Like a thermostat constantly tweaking things rather than just an on-off switch.
That's a good analogy, and it maps directly onto how tech platforms work, doesn't it? Continuous monitoring, subtle nudges, algorithmic shaping of your experience. In this view, individuals become individuals, basically. Data points constantly being broken down, recombined, analyzed. This shift, the analysis argues, fundamentally changes political power itself, from overt discipline to this pervasive, modulated control.
Okay, and the third framework, Habermas and rationality.
Right. Habermas distinguished between communicative rationality, reaching understanding through dialogue, and instrumental rationality, which is all about technical efficiency, getting things done.
And the argument is that these techno-libertarian models are all about the instrumental side.
Pretty much entirely, according to the analysis. They prioritize technical efficiency as the main goal, the main value.
So what's the implication of that?
Well, it raises a really critical question. When technical efficiency becomes the only standard for political legitimacy, what happens? Platform-mediated communication, optimized for clicks or engagement or whatever, can actually undermine real democratic discussion. This creates what Habermas would call a legitimacy crisis. Authority starts resting on, technical know-how rather than democratic consent or deliberation.
Okay, so where did these, frankly, quite radical ideas originate? The analysis points to specific thinkers.
It does. It traces the intellectual roots to figures like Curtis Yarvin, Nick Land, and Balaji Srinivasan. They are presented as theorists who essentially provide the philosophical groundwork for moving away from democratic institutions towards technocratic efficiency.
What's their core argument then?
They seem to share a fundamental critique of democratic institutions as, well, inefficient, maybe corrupt, ultimately illegitimate. So Yarvin's CEO monarch, Land's kind of accelerationist embrace of AI governance, Srinivasan's blockchain network states, they all prioritize technical solutions and efficiency over messy democratic participation.
But it's not always consistent, is it? The analysis points out contradictions between what they say and what they do.
Absolutely. That's a key finding. There are these systematic contradictions.
Like Peter Thiel.
Exactly. He's often cited advocating for decentralization, libertarian ideals, but at the same time, he built Palantir, which is a cornerstone of centralized surveillance systems, often used by governments. And he's quoted explicitly saying, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." It's this phenomenon scholars have called authoritarian libertarianism, sort of market freedom plus social control.
And Musk. His journey seems to embody this too.
Very much so, according to the analysis. His push for absolute free speech on X or Twitter, it coincided, paradoxically, with accusations of increased government-requested censorship in some countries. And his anti-government rhetoric sits alongside this massive dependence on government contracts for SpaceX and Tesla. Plus the deep regulatory integration suggested by this hypothetical DOG role, the Department of Government Efficiency. It's quite a tangle.
Right. Let's unpack this network idea more. The PayPal mafia. That term gets thrown around a lot.
It does, and the analysis positions them as perhaps the most influential tech elite network.
So around 220 former PayPal folks founding or funding major tech companies. The reach sounds incredible.
It is. But what's really fascinating, or maybe concerning depending on your view, is the analysis of their systematic penetration into government, especially highlighted during the Trump administration. Think about the potential roles mentioned. J.D. Vance as VP, David Sachs as a possible AI and crypto czar, and Elon Musk hypothetically heading this DOGE. It represents a direct pipeline from this network into the state apparatus.
And how does this network reinforce itself? It's not just individuals, right?
No, it operates through shared investments, overlapping board positions, policy organizations, firms like Founders Fund, Andreessen Horowitz. They create these interlocking financial interests. This enables coordinated political action. They even cross-invest in defense tech like Anduril and SpaceX, which, creates perfectly aligned incentives to push for military spending and capture the relevant regulations.
And this coordination isn't just domestic, is it? The analysis goes global.
It does. It documents alleged systematic coordination, or at least communication, with authoritarian regimes. Musk's reported communications with Putin, with Xi Jinping, combined with endorsements of far-right parties in Europe. It demonstrates how owning these global platforms potentially allows for political influence that completely bypasses traditional democratic checks and balances.
The source uses another strong term here, digital imperialism.
Yeah, suggesting these platforms can become tools for geopolitical influence, operating above or beyond national democratic controls. A new kind of power projection, perhaps?
Okay, so this isn't entirely unprecedented. Are there historical parallels or lessons?
There are. The analysis points to past techno-libertarian movements for some sobering insights. Remember the Pirate Party movement? It was quite big for a while, 39 parties, 36 countries. They had some real electoral success initially. The Swedish Pirate Party got over 7% in the 2009 EU elections.
Right, I remember that. But what happened?
Well, according to the analysis, the movement largely collapsed. Why? Internal contradictions about democracy itself, ideological splits, lack of resources. But the core issue highlighted is this paradox. Movements, starting with decentralization ideals, getting captured or co-opted by centralized corporate power.
And even earlier roots, like the cypherpunks?
Yeah, the analysis traces that lineage, too. The original 90s cypherpunk culture was very focused on privacy, anonymity, freedom from surveillance. But somehow that ethos evolved, or parts of it did, into supporting the very surveillance capitalism they initially resisted. And in some cases, even shifting towards advocating for authoritarian governance models, bizarrely enough.
That's a pattern of elite capture.
That's how the analysis frames it, a broader pattern. Look at lobbying today. Nearly 300 tech lobbyists in D.C., basically one for every 2 members of Congress. The argument is this isn't just lobbying anymore. It's a systematic capture of democratic institutions. It's a shift towards oligarchic governance driven by economic muscle rather than building popular support.
Okay, let's circle back specifically to Elon Musk.
Yeah.
His political evolution is quite the story. From calling himself half Democrat, half Republican, to being the single biggest individual political donor. It really is a case study in how tech elites can translate economic power into, well, raw political authority.
And what's interesting is the analysis pinpoints a potential trigger for his sharp political turn. It suggests the COVID-19 lockdowns, which impacted Tesla production, were a key moment. It shows how regulatory constraints, things that affect capital accumulation, can actually fuel political radicalization among the powerful.
Right. And that People's Party idea he floated, what happened there?
It never really became a formal party, did it?
No. The analysis suggests it morphed into something more direct. Potential government integration via this DOGE concept.
And also targeting specific legislative districts with a different idea, an America Party. Less about broad ideology, more about targeted power plays.
So the Twitter X acquisition becomes central here, $44 billion.
Absolutely pivotal, according to this view. It created this unprecedented combination, owning a major communication platform and potentially having direct government authority. The transformation of the platform itself, from a supposed global town square to what critics call a right-wing echo chamber. It demonstrates how private ownership of this critical infrastructure allows political shaping outside democratic accountability structures.
So the integration of platform ownership with formal government power, like DOGE represents, it's a new kind of power.
The analysis argues it's qualitatively new. Direct control over information flow and government process. Yeah, that's a profound shift.
How are other places dealing with this? Is it just a U.S. phenomenon?
Not at all.
Yeah.
But the reactions differ. The analysis contrasts the EU's approach to the Digital Services Act, the AI Act, trying to create comprehensive rules, with the U.S. response, which is seen as much more fragmented, piecemeal, and heavily shaped by that intense tech lobbying we talked about.
And companies can exploit these differences.
Precisely. This regulatory divergence allows them to play jurisdictions off against each other, essentially, while still consolidating their global influence. They can operate across borders, challenging traditional ideas of national democratic sovereignty.
The analysis also mentions digital colonialism again here.
Yeah, pointing to wealth flows from the global south to Silicon Valley, and the way technical standards, platform designs, even cultural norms get imposed globally through these dominant platforms.
So we have the U.S.-China tech rivalry, the EU trying a third way,
Yeah.
but the core issue remains.
The fundamental challenge, as the analysis sees it, is this concentration of platform ownership globally in just a few hands. Their ability to coordinate political influence across borders while keeping private control over the infrastructure. That's the crux of the problem for democratic governance everywhere.
Which brings us to the implications for democracy itself. This sounds like it creates a real crisis.
A legitimacy crisis, yes, that's the term used. When authority claims are based on technical expertise, on efficiency, rather than democratic consent, it fundamentally clashes with core liberal democratic principles, doesn't it?
And there's this transparency paradox. What's that about?
It's a fascinating idea. Systems might be technically open source, the code is available, but in reality, they're so complex, they're basically incomprehensible to the average citizen, even many policymakers. So this privileges technical knowledge. It creates a kind of epistemological authoritarianism's rule by those who understand the code. And it systematically excludes non-technical voices, creating new inequalities based on technical literacy.
It sounds pretty bleak. Does the analysis offer any way out? Any resistance possible?
It does identify potential counter-strategies or counter-hegemonic possibilities. Habermas's ideas about communicative action emphasizing open dialogue are offered as one framework. And Lewis Mumford's vision of polytechnics, which is about more diverse, democratically controlled technologies, is another touch point.
Are there practical examples of this happening now?
Well, the analysis mentions contemporary democratic innovations. Things like participatory budgeting, where citizens help decide tech priorities, or citizen juries evaluating algorithms. These provide models for democratic engagement. But, and it's a big but, they face huge structural hurdles. Platform monopolies, elite capture. Overcoming these requires serious, sustained political mobilization. It won't happen easily.
So, thinking about solutions.
Yeah.
What does the analysis suggest, beyond just tweaking regulations?
It points toward more structural reforms, things like serious antitrust enforcement to actually break up platform monopolies, or developing public digital infrastructure, genuine public alternatives to private platform control.
So it's about democratizing the tech itself, not just managing its effects.
Exactly. That seems to be the core argument. We need to democratize technology governance, create new institutions for public participation in tech policy decisions, ensure public control over critical digital infrastructure, and develop international rules that put democratic values ahead of purely technical efficiency.
And we need more research too, presumably.
Definitely. The analysis calls for more theoretical work, but also better empirical investigation. We need better ways to measure platform influence, long-term studies tracking these trends, and new conceptual tools for understanding things like algorithmic governance and what digital democracy could even look like. There's a lot still to figure out. So the big takeaway really from this deep dive is that this isn't just about tech companies wanting favorable policies. The analysis suggests the political influence of tech CEOs represents a fundamental shift in how political power itself works. It's presented as a systematic challenge to democratic institutions as we've known them.
Yeah, and the implications go way beyond just tech policy, don't they? It touches on these really fundamental questions about the future of democracy, this concentration of communication power in so few hands, platforms owned by just a few individuals, combined with their potential integration into government itself. It creates these unprecedented possibilities for oligarchic control, really challenging basic ideas about democratic sovereignty.
Which leaves us and you with a really important question to ponder, I think. As these tech elites gain more and more political power, and as these techno-libertarian ideas get put into practice, how do our societies need to adapt? What do we need to do to actually preserve meaningful self-governance in this rapidly evolving digital age?
That is definitely something to think about. A truly thought-provoking deep dive indeed. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery.